Well, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and its members, welcome to our first Executive Summit series of 2022. I'm Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Well, we're meeting on a virtual platform. I'd like to begin today's event by recognizing the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands that we're on today from coast to coast to coast. I want to acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people, and to celebrate the importance of the land that each of us calls home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Well, today's Executive Summit puts the focus on critical minerals, and the timing simply couldn't be more appropriate. As COVID continues to lay bare the fragility and importance of both national and global supply chains, and as Canada presses forward on its journey towards net zero, critical minerals have a key role to play, and they present an extraordinary opportunity for Canada. From the production of everyday consumer goods that we rely on daily, like cell phones, through to national defense applications and the ability to transition to a low carbon economy, critical minerals are essential. The Canadian brand is strong. We're seen as ethical and as rule-based. We're blessed with both abundant natural resources and talented entrepreneurial people. However, while our country and people have all the ingredients for success, our global competitors are working hard to attract investment that can create the next generation of opportunities elsewhere. Canada must ensure that types of jobs and opportunities that people want are being created here. Continuing to engage the rich talent pool of Canada's Indigenous communities across Canada and executing a critical mineral strategy will be both key to helping the sector realize its potential and to propelling Canada's sustainable long-term economic recovery and growth. Indigenous peoples are one of Canada's fastest growing demographics. And while many successful partnerships with Indigenous communities already exist, we have much more work to do. Executing an effective critical minerals strategy is vital for reinforcing Canada's global brand as a secure and sustainable supplier for domestic and international markets, as well as for facilitating investments that are required to expand national critical mineral stockpiles and supply chains. Now, to support this process, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce has partnered with public and private sector leaders to strengthen all segments of critical mineral supply chains, from mineral exploration to closed-loop recycling. Without collaborative partnerships between private and public sector stakeholders, the economic and job-creating opportunities for Canadians from the sustainable extraction and processing of critical minerals could be lost. Through our newly formed Critical Minerals Council, the Canadian Chamber is strengthening ties among upstream and downstream organizations, economic and environmental ambitions, and industry and Indigenous stakeholders. Our goal is to propel the sustainable development of critical mineral supply chains in Canada and to provide global markets with the resources required to transition to a low carbon future. Together, we can advance business leadership on resource extraction, processing, usage, export, and recycling. Now, I'll conclude by reiterating that Canada's critical mineral sector will be essential to our success in the face of fierce competition. It will help us generate sustained, inclusive business investment, jobs, and growth, not just in the short term, but for many years to come. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to turn things over to Carolyn Chisholm, who's the Director of External Affairs at Rio Tinto, for our first session of the day, an opening keynote and fireside chat with Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. Carolyn, I know that we're all really looking forward to your conversation. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Perrin, and welcome, Minister Wilkinson. I want to first say that I come to you today from the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, and I'm really looking forward to having a fulsome discussion with you about critical minerals, Minister Wilkinson. I'm not going to get into reading your bio because you are no stranger to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and that you are, in fact, been a very active participant in the great work that Perrin has undergone with the various councils, including I had the benefit of participating in your Net Zero Council presentation just prior to Christmas, and also got to hear you at another fireside chat back in January at the BC Natural Resources Forum. So I'm really looking forward to your comments today, and I'll hand the floor over to you, and then we'll get into a good conversation. Thanks, Minister.
Thank you very much, Carolyn, and good morning, everyone. I am joining you today from St. John's, which is located on the traditional ancestral territories of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq peoples. C'est un plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. Merci à la Chambre de commerce pour le travail important qu'elle accomplit et pour avoir organisé cette sommet sur cette question importante. I would like to begin by highlighting a simple fact. The global economy is changing, and it is changing rapidly, and it is changing whether we like it or we don't. It is changing in significant measure because the science of climate change has told us unequivocally that it must change. And this change is taking place in virtually every economic sector of every country in the world. Recently, as financial markets have increasingly begun to price climate risk into investment decisions, these changes are accelerating. Smart money is increasingly flowing away from assets with significant exposure to climate risk towards opportunities that are compatible with a transition to a net zero world. Quiconque pense que ces changements ne sont rien d'autre qu'un choix politique ne se rend pas compte de la situation globale. Un monde sans émissions n'est plus un simple souhait politique, c'est un corps concurrentiel entre les plus grandes entreprises, les plus grands investisseurs et les plus grandes économies du monde. Canada's natural resources can, must, and will provide a foundation for a cleaner and more prosperous future as we grapple with the impacts of a changing climate. And a key to this economic prosperity is critical minerals, the minerals that are essential to everything from greening our manufacturing industries to driving the global transition to cleaner energy. Make no mistake, expanding renewable energy and clean technology is a minerals intensive enterprise, and that is particularly so for critical minerals. The sun provides the raw energy, but the electricity flows through copper. Wind turbines need manganese, platinum, and rare earth magnets. Electric vehicle batteries are made with lithium, cobalt, and nickel. In fact, according to the International Energy Agency, a mid-century zero-carbon world will require a six-fold increase in the production of these and other critical minerals by 2030 to fuel the energy transition. At the same time, the World Bank is predicting the need for a 500% increase by 2050 in the production of minerals like graphite, lithium, and cobalt to feed the clean energy transition. Le Canada est déjà l'un des principaux producteurs mondiaux de plusieurs de ces minéraux essentiels et il a la capacité d'en produire beaucoup plus. We are the world's top producer for potash, second for uranium, fourth for titanium, aluminum, and platinum, and sixth for cobalt and nickel. And as one of the few Western nations with significant deposits of every mineral needed to manufacture batteries, we can and will be an integral player in this transition. Today, more than 120 countries have committed to achieving net zero by 2050. This means a couple of different things. First of all, global energy systems will need to undergo a fundamental change to achieve these emissions reductions. And secondly, this will lead to a significant increase in demand for critical minerals. If you just take electric vehicles, for example, in Canada, domestic sales of EVs are about 55,000 units per year presently. We know that this number is going to grow exponentially. In fact, Canada has pledged that there will be no new passenger vehicles with internal combustion engines sold in the country after 2035. And Canada is certainly not alone. The US, the European Union, and other countries have also set ambitious targets for EV uptake. And in response, automotive manufacturers will launch more than 300 electric vehicle models over the next 5 years. But Canada needs to act fast and take advantage of this global context by increasing its domestic production and its processing capacity of critical minerals. Le fait est que les chaînes d'approvisionnement actuelles en minéraux critiques sont concentrées dans trop peu de pays. Nous devons changer cela. Comme de plus en plus de pays et d'économies en viennent à dépendre des minéraux critiques et des sources d'énergie qui ont besoin, Nous devons nous assurer que le Canada et nos alliés internationaux ont la capacité nécessaire pour produire et transformer ces minéraux et ces produits. That is why we must work to attract investment into Canada, and we must put into place thoughtful policies to build our place in the supply chains that will drive North America's economic future. It's also why we are taking a very careful approach to foreign investment and commercial arrangements in a space that has significant strategic importance, not only for Canada, but for our international partners as well. We are not alone in moving to seize this moment and opportunities our resource wealth can provide. The US has already made a number of funding commitments to increase domestic production of critical minerals, and it is keen to work with partners like Canada to secure supply chains. Japan is looking to North America to diversify the minerals and metals needed for their high technology manufacturing sectors. And the EU is also looking to North America for access to sustainable and responsibly sourced critical minerals. Clearly, we need to build even stronger relationships with our strategic partners on this front to ensure that Canada is the supplier of choice for the minerals that will power the low carbon economy of the future. And this work is well underway. Canada already supplies 13 of the 35 minerals deemed critical by the United States. We are pushing forward on initiatives of the Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals collaboration with the US to promote open trade, boost investment in Canadian projects, and integrate our supply chains. We've also joined the US-led Energy Resource Governance Initiative, a multi-country effort aimed at promoting sound governance and secure supply chains for critical raw materials. These developments present a significant opportunity not only for Canadian resource exports, but also for our domestic industries. Here at home, the government and the private sector must work together to fast-track research, innovation, and exploration. To help these efforts, Canada has earmarked $9.6 million over the next 3 years to establish a critical minerals center of excellence at Natural Resources Canada. The center will work with provincial and territorial partners on critical minerals programs and projects, including the Joint Action Plan with the US. We're also providing another almost $50 million over 3 years for federal R&D to advance our critical minerals processing and refining expertise for batteries. And last year, we released Canada's critical mineral list, which is 31 minerals that we believe are essential to our economic future and security. They also reflect emerging global trends and the needs of our partners. This list sends a clear signal to investors about where Canada intends to focus, the minerals we can deliver, the high value chains that we can supply and build, and the support that we can provide for clean technologies and sophisticated manufacturing based right here in Canada. Finally, in order to tie all of the various elements together, we are moving forward on an overarching critical minerals strategy for Canada to speed up the development of our critical minerals resources and expertise here at home, to co-develop opportunities with Indigenous peoples, and to build stronger ties with our trading partners. Ultimately, we intend for Canada to be a global leader in the production and the processing of critical minerals and in the production of value-added products. To do so, we must be a driver of research, innovation, and development. We must accelerate Canadian projects focused on critical mineral production and processing. We must build sustainable infrastructure and advance economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples through meaningful participation in resource projects. And we must promote and support Canada's diverse workforce, an asset that will be integral to building up sustainability and prosperity in our resource sectors. And we have to do all of these things in an environmentally sustainable manner. Enhancing best practices and investing in key infrastructure and clean technologies will provide the tools that we need to utilize to ensure that our critical minerals are developed in a way that is environmentally sensitive, respecting concerns around habitat and biodiversity loss. We must move forward in a thoughtful manner, one that allows us to leverage our resource wealth to create jobs and drive prosperity, while also acknowledging our responsibility to protect the world around us. During the years I spent as an executive in the clean tech space, I saw firsthand how our dynamic private sector can spur innovation and develop new opportunities. I certainly understand the economic importance of being an early mover. I know that Canada has what it takes to thrive in the low carbon economy, to push the envelope on new technologies needed to reach net zero by 2050. And I know that the sustainable use of minerals and metals will be at the heart of our efforts to reorient our economy, create sustainable jobs, and forge a cleaner future. La science est claire, le changement climatique est le plus grand défi de notre génération, mais si nous adoptons une approche réfléchie, dans notre réponse et nous sommes intelligents dans nos investissements, il peut aussi être la plus grande opportunité de notre vie. Bien sûr, certains croient encore qu'il existe une tension inéluctable entre le développement des ressources naturelles et la durabilité environnementale, que ce qui est bon pour l'un est inévitablement mauvais pour l'autre. Je peux vous dire que ce n'est pas tout simplement pas vrai. En fait, c'est le contraire qui est vrai. This is not a zero-sum game. In the economy of today and tomorrow, strategies for climate action and economic prosperity must be one and the same. My job, as I understand it, is to thoughtfully work with organizers like the Chambers of Commerce to determine how we can best utilize our abundance of resources, our talent, and our experience to develop, pursue, and secure the opportunities that will create jobs, enhance competitiveness, and spur economic growth and prosperity. The development, production, and processing of Canada's critical mineral wealth and the creation of resilient low-carbon supply chains provides an opportunity to do just that. So let me close where I began. The global economy is changing and there's no going back. We need to leverage our inherent strengths and comparative advantages. We need to work together to develop a competitive, inclusive, and sustainable natural resource-driven economy, an economy that creates wealth and jobs in every region of this country, while also ensuring that we achieve our ambitious climate goals. Frankly, I am excited about the possibilities and the opportunities that lie ahead of us. And so I just want to thank you once again to the Chamber of Commerce for organizing this important summit and for inviting me to speak to you today.
Thank you, Minister. Great comments. And clearly you're a glass half full kind of person here. And we're really, as someone who works in the mining industry and has worked around the resource sector for most of my career, it's really exciting to see that level of optimism, notwithstanding the big challenges in front of us. And I think that's where I'd like to start there. We're going to have a few questions and then we'll open it up to the audience. But you obviously, looking at your mandate letter, have a lot on your plate. And as you say in your speech, you're clearly optimistic about the opportunities in front of us as a country, whether it's through the skills we have in our workforce, the natural resources that we're endowed with, and really a commitment, a collective commitment to support an energy and industry transition. So I have a simple question. What keeps you up at night? And what makes you most excited about the opportunities in front of us as a country?
Well, I mean, what keeps me up at night is essentially the threat associated with inaction or not acting quick enough. I mean, I as you know, live in British Columbia. In the course of this past year, we saw devastating forest fires and devastating floods. And those are the product of the accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere that has happened over the past number of decades. We have a limited window to try to forestall worse impacts, not to alleviate all impacts, because that is kind of baked into the future, but to ensure that we actually can stabilize this such that our children are actually going to have a reasonably bright future. And so I worry about urgency, about actually acting, not just talking, not just saying nice things, but actually acting in a manner that's actually going to get us to where we need to go, where science tells us, not politics, not partisanship, where science tells us that we need to go. But I also, on the opportunity side of it, you know, I spent over 20 years in the business community before getting into politics. Some of it actually in adjacent to the mining space. And I look at some of the things that we're going to need to do, and I think that the economic opportunities for a country like Canada are enormous. We need to be thoughtful about how we approach them. We need to actually ensure that we're not just letting things happen to us, which I think sometimes we Canadians are prone to do. And we need to find ways to ensure that we are acting together. That means federal and provincial governments, it means industry and labor and Indigenous peoples aligning on some of the big opportunities such that we actually can seize them, that Canada can be a leader in the world in a range of different things. We have natural comparative advantages in a number of these different areas that are going to be huge. And so I am very energized by the opportunity set, but we actually have to act now on that as well.
Absolutely. And if we don't, our children are going to remind us that we didn't, and it's their generation we're impacting. So completely agree with you, Minister. And I might jump to another question that's linked to that. And if you look at the mining industry and the labor demographics that's facing the industry at the moment, we know, according to the Mining Human Resources Council, that about 30,000 people will have retired from the industry by 2030, when we have our first major climate commitment target. And that doesn't account for the new workers that we're looking to attract to the industry. I know in our company alone, hundreds and hundreds of positions are going unfilled. And so we also know that mining has often been seen in the past as an old industry, maybe seen as part of the problem and not necessarily part of the solution of the big challenge of our day, which is climate change. So how do we attract your children and my children to go into a sector like mining? And how do we convince them that we actually need those more mines that you spoke of when you talk about the increased demand for metal between now and 2050? How do we attract the young people to come into mining? Because we've seen, for example, that mining engineering schools are closing in some cases. So, but we also know that if we're going to crack the code around critical minerals processing, we need more PhDers. We need more metallurgical scientists. So, as the minister, as the ambassador for our resources sector, what do you tell that next generation why mining should be listed on their career pathways to explore?
It's a really good question. Let me take it in a couple of tiers. I mean, the first is there are going to be demographic challenges for a whole range of different industries going forward. Given the aging nature of our population, and it behooves us as we move forward to be thinking about how we ensure that we are creating a sufficient supply of workers to be able to actually do the things that we want to do. I mean, my concern going forward is not that there are going to be a lot of people out of work and not having things to do. My great fear is that we're actually going to have so much demand for workers that we're just not going to be able to supply it all. And so immigration is obviously a continuing importance. Issues like the childcare program that was rolled out is really important in terms of getting more women into the labor force, and ensuring that we're actually reskilling workers who fall out of the labor force and getting them back in quickly, so we don't have people who are chronically unemployed at a time when we actually need more workers. But certainly, to your point about mining, and I don't think mining's alone. I think that the same thing is true with respect, for example, to a lot of the trades for construction and renovation, where you're having a harder time bringing young people into that. I think with respect to mining, you're right that many people see it as a kind of a legacy natural resource industry. And I think part of what we all need to do is actually reframe that conversation, which is it is actually a critical enabler to this global transition. It is part of the green economy. Being involved in mining is part of that. I used to run clean tech companies, and by and large, it was a young demographic that worked at the companies that I was involved in. And they worked there not because we paid them more money, not because we gave them more time off, we didn't, but because they actually felt like there was something that they were doing that was more than just a paycheck, in working on solutions for hydrogen and fuel cells, or working, in the case of mining, on technologies for remediating water so that you actually are cleaning it up to be able to put it back into a water course without harm to the natural environment. And we used to attract all kinds of folks that would come to us specifically because there was a purpose beyond just money to what they were doing. And I think we need to reframe mining in that context. There is an enormous opportunity here to reposition mining as a critical enabler in this green economy. And I think that will help with the recruitment of young people into those disciplines at universities and into the industry going forward.
We will have to develop a plan for that, Minister. And that maybe is a good segue to my next question. And it really gets at the heart of what we've witnessed in Canada, much probably to our great surprise, is with the with the polarization and the populism from the incidents of the last few weeks in Ottawa. And we see these rising tensions over whatever issue, whether it's COVID mandates, but also we've seen it in resource projects too, that become the flashpoints of populist concern. But we know, as you said in your speech, that to achieve that net zero commitment, we need more mines. We're going to need them. How do we work together, industry and government, to build that net critical social license that will allow us to get more mines permitted in Canada? What does that look like?
Well, I think there's certainly at least a couple of things there. I mean, I think as we think about the critical minerals in the context of what they are going to be used for, you're going to find more openness than perhaps you would at times for other types of mining, because people recognize that you don't have solar panels, you don't have wind turbines, you don't have electric vehicles unless you actually have access to these things. But it's also the case that we need to ensure that we're doing this in a manner that actually will ensure that there is license. And I think there's a couple of critical components there. One is working at the very front end with Indigenous peoples who are proximate to the areas where mines are being proposed. And that's not just working with those folks from an impact benefit agreement perspective, but it may also involve finding ways to involve Indigenous communities from an equity perspective so that they actually are benefiting from it over the long term and have some influence on shaping how this actually is going to be done. I think that the second part of it is we need to ensure that at the very beginning, we are thinking about some of the critical environmental issues that are going to have to be addressed so that we're not spinning around, trying to figure out at the back end how to protect boreal caribou because you've actually built a road right through their habitat. We need to actually think about those things at the front end. Think about the Ring of Fire, for example. I mean, if we're going to develop the Ring of Fire, there are different ways to do that. You could have roads running to every mine that's going to be developed, running right through critical habitat of a whole range of endangered species, and that will be a problem. Or you can think about how you actually create one central road, for example, that have spurs off of it so that you're actually minimizing the impact on the environment and on habitat. Let's have those conversations at the beginning, not at the end. I've been part of too many processes where you're trying to figure out how to redo something after so much work has already been put into it. And I think those are some of the things that can help us to get the license that we need to ensure that people have comfort that we are actually ensuring that this is done in a sustainable way. And I'm not casting aspersions on the development of mines in the past. I'm just saying, let's make sure that we're being proactive on those issues going forward.
And I'll ask one last question, then we'll put it to the audience. And this gets at the heart of why we're coming together today, and that's around critical minerals and the critical mineral strategy that you're working on with your ministerial colleagues. We know that there's already been some great work done by the government as relates to the CIF NZA program supporting battery mineral development, the work that your department is working on from an R&D perspective. Is there anything you're able to share with us as to what we might see in terms of the critical mineral strategy, and really maybe enlighten us a little bit more what's happening in the conversations with their allies like the United States, Australia, and Europe, and Japan?
Yeah, we're in the process of, I mean, the strategy is kind of an end-to-end strategy, and it focuses initially on research and development and on geoscience. And it moves all the way through how can we actually incent or assist with not only exploration, but eventually with the development of new mining projects where, at times some of these minerals, it's not so simple. We have some where, one country controls the bulk of supply and certainly the vast majority of processing and has the ability to influence pricing. We need to think about how do we actually address that? If we want to see these things developed, how do we think about business models that are going to work in that context? And then we think about the utilization of those things, including, ideally the location of things like battery manufacturing facilities here in Canada. And so there is a critical mineral strategy that Natural Resources Canada is responsible for developing, but we are working hand in hand with Innovation, Science and Economic Development, who have responsibility for the upstream kind of product usage of critical minerals. We obviously will want to resource that, and that is a conversation that certainly we are having as we put this together. We've been consulting with probably many of you on what you think we should be looking for and asking for. Ultimately, my colleague, the Minister of Finance, will have some challenging decisions to make about allocation of funds, but certainly, you know, if you have a critical mineral strategy, you do need some funding to be able to actually roll that out. And I think that collectively as a government, we recognize the importance of this, both economically, but also I would say from a federal provincial perspective. This is an opportunity that actually relates to almost every province and territory in this country, where everybody is interested in finding ways to work together to advance this. And so there is an opportunity for effectively some form of nation building and building, you know, economies at the regional level that can be based on good federal provincial industry labor cooperation. Certainly, yes, the Americans, the Europeans, we are having lots of active dialogue. As you can appreciate, the geopolitical situation is shifting almost every day. And there certainly is a desire on the part of all Western countries to have access to a secure and stable supply of these kinds of minerals and not to be dependent on one country or another. And Canada is very well situated to be able to supply some of those things. Obviously, we would like to do a lot of the processing of them. We'd like to do some of the manufacturing, but there are cases for sure in which we are interested in being the supplier of choice to the United States, Europe, and we are having very active conversations with them, with Japan and others.
Maybe I'll ask one quick question. What about foreign direct investment? As someone who works for a multinational mining company, do you see any obstacles to attracting foreign direct investment? As you know, we always say we're competing with the globe in terms of where we make our investments as a global company. So just any comments on that?
Well, I mean, we certainly want to attract foreign investment in the context of building out our strategy, and that is particularly true of other Western countries. There are obviously some broader geopolitical issues with investments from some parts of the world, but clearly Australia and others are home to some of the larger mining companies in the world. Canada obviously has a number of them as well. We are certainly interested in attracting those investments. I think part of that is actually having a coherent strategy that actually lays out how we're going to do this and the role that the government's going to play in helping to do this. Part of it is about ensuring that there is active federal provincial cooperation with things like regulatory processes and permitting processes, and ensuring that this is a good place to do business. I think, you know, that is buttressed also with the fact that we have an abundant supply of every critical mineral on our list. Not that they're all equal, and there's probably some that are nearer term priorities than others, but I think that it's creating that environment, but also ensuring that we have some tools to be encouraging that kind of investment coming forward, and that's something again that we are looking at very actively.
As part of the strategy, I'm assuming. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to hand it over. I've asked enough questions. I'm going to hand it over to the audience for some questions. So I see 3, so I'm going to ask the audience to keep them coming, or else we're going to be early. We don't really want to be early in our fireside chat. So first question to you, Minister, what is Canada doing to help secure sufficient investment outside of the federal government in critical minerals extraction and processing? So maybe let's get that, cracking that code around the processing, maybe start there and get your comments. Because it is a special part of the critical mineral supply chain that comes with its own unique challenges. So maybe comment.
Yeah, so I mean, the processing part of it, again, you sort of have to think about this, I think, in kind of a G7 context. There are some types of processing where every country is going to need some processing capacity or would desire to have some processing capacity. And then there are others like rare earths where you probably don't need a rare earths processing facility in every G7 country in the world. And so Canada obviously needs to focus on those areas where deemed certain minerals to be a priority. We have availability of those materials today, or we are proximate to getting there. Like, you know, there are a number of mines that either are in the process of being developed or that may have been actually closed and could be reopened in the context of demand that we're seeing. There are a couple of lithium mines, for example, in this country. And focusing on the processing where we actually either have or will see significant amounts of the material itself. Certainly one of them in Canada is nickel, nickel sulfate, where we're going to need large quantities for batteries on a go-forward basis. We obviously already produce significant amounts of nickel. And there are a number of others. And so certainly we are looking to attract foreign investment in the context of the processing. We're also looking for Canadian investment to build those kinds of facilities that can help us to supply things like batteries. And to be honest with you, I expect that at some point you may even see some of the auto manufacturing companies or the battery manufacturing companies going backwards down the chain to actually be part of that processing to ensure that they actually have secure supplies to be able to actually build the things that they need to build. So, you know, I think there's lots of different ways in which to go after this, but certainly we are very live to this conversation, and it is part of the discussions around the critical mineral strategy and around the broader piece of work that Minister Champagne's doing with respect to things like battery production.
Great. Okay, one more question from Stephen Goodman. Does Canada have enough potential in all or most of the 13 critical minerals we produce to provide needed supply both domestically and to the international customers we want to become a supplier of choice for? Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's the 13, I guess, that we produce, but we have a list of 31 critical minerals that we believe are going to be extremely important going forward. We actually have resources for all 31 of those. Of course, there are different levels of abundance. And it may be that we don't fully yet appreciate how vast some of those resources are, hence the desire to invest more in geoscience and some of the continuing work there. But our view is we do actually have sufficient supplies for some of the more core elements that we probably will focus on in the shorter term. Things that are critical, for example, for batteries. I think you will probably see a bit of a phased approach in the context of the critical mineral strategy, where there will be a grouping of things associated with certain product categories where Canada will probably want to focus initially. Doesn't mean that we're not going to get to all of the others, but I think there is something to be said to being a little bit focused at the front end of any enterprise like this. So.
Next question. How do we avoid what Canada typically does, support the higher value economy activity of others through supplying raw materials, including to the United States? So it gets at your comments around value added processing and production in Canada.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to escape the historic role of hewers of wood and drawers of water. Where Canada actually is part of that overall supply chain. As I said before, it's probably not the case that we're going to do everything in this country for every mineral, but there is an opportunity, especially I think, given where geopolitics has evolved and where it likely will evolve going forward, to be thinking about this more on a Western basis. And certainly from our perspective, there are some big opportunities for us to do processing, but also to do some of the downstream product work like batteries and other things that will accrue value through the value chain. And that is absolutely a piece of work that both I am focused on and my friend Minister Champagne is focused on as we move this forward.
Last question, and then I may take the liberty to ask you another one. Are there going to be any new or changes to existing policy with regards to land reclamation? I'm assuming they mean by reclaiming old mines. I'm not sure if that's what they're getting at. Certainly, we know from our perspective, Minister, we look at our opportunities for critical minerals as often from existing sites, and how you reclaim the value from existing operations as opposed to looking at new mines. And I know our experts have said that you may have to rethink how we cast the regulatory frame with that circularity in mind. So maybe we can take the question that way.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There are a number of areas where some of the sources of these minerals are tailings from other mines, or even, there are people working on extracting some of these from the oil sands tailing ponds, or from brines that exist down well. And so that's different, and it's probably the case that some regulatory structures have not fully anticipated that. Those are exactly the issues that we need to be seized with, and we need to be seized with not just on a federal level, but very much on a federal provincial level, because many of those kinds of processes are provincial in terms of permitting and regulation. As you will know, the federal government typically in the mining space is involved often in environmental assessments at the front end of the project, in water-related issues associated with impacts on fish and fish habitat, and on issues around Indigenous rights and migratory birds. But a lot of the granular work is at the province. And so one of the things that we are looking to do is engage regional economic conversations, with critical minerals being one of the elements, only one of the elements, with each jurisdiction, to try to ensure that we're both aligning our resources in a manner that's going to make us more effective, but also to see about how we can better align regulatory processes and permitting processes.
On that point, and I know you spoke about this at the BC Natural Resources Forum as well, and we've heard some concerns about the length of time it takes to get projects permitted. And we know the intent behind the Impact Assessment Act was to deal with some of those concerns around community support and Indigenous engagement at the front end. Do you see that there's things that we could do, as a former Minister of Environment, now Minister of Natural Resources, that we could do both as proponents and governments to try to still have diligent processes, because that's how you build public trust, but also try to get those processes through that regulatory cycle quicker? How can we do that? What do we need to do as proponents, and what does governments need to do as the regulator to try to make sure that we streamline as much as we can?
Well, I think it's an important point, because we certainly are interested in finding pathways to accelerate work on this. It's in no one's interest that it takes 10 years to actually effectively go through the process of environmental assessment and permitting for a deposit. I guess what I would say is the best ways, I think, to accelerate that are threefold, and I think spoke a little bit to this earlier, but one is do Indigenous engagement early on and try to find perhaps unique mechanisms for aligning interests. And I think I mentioned, the idea of perhaps the federal government creating an equity pool to enable Indigenous communities to participate in the project at the early stages, such that they actually feel both a sense of ownership and benefit, but also they can influence how the project is actually developed as we go along. I think it's being very thoughtful at the front end about how to mitigate impacts on the local environment. And that's both with respect to water, which is a big issue for certain kinds of mining, and with respect to habitat of endangered species. And that's one where the mining sector has often gotten, held up, where, the whole project has been designed, and all of a sudden it's recognized that, the road and the processing facility are happening in critical habitat of the southern mountain caribou. I think being very thoughtful at the front end about how you avoid that, and that can certainly be enabled by engaging early on with the Canada Wildlife Service at Environment Canada to try to figure those things out before you get too far down the path. And then the last thing I would say is better federal, provincial, and industry conversations around alignment of federal and provincial processes. Perhaps there are ways for us to do things more effectively by doing them concurrently rather than sequentially. Maybe there are different ways in which we're asking for the same information. We don't need to do that. Like, are there ways in which we can actually make that process work better? And that answer may be a little bit different in every province and territory in this country, which, every one of them has their own unique approach to this.
One project, one assessment, right? That's always been the mantra.
Exactly.
Well, Minister, I just want to say thank you for, as always, for your thoughtful comments. You have given us lots to think about and lots to look forward to in terms of what's coming in terms of the critical mineral strategy itself. And we're really, as a sector, really excited about the attention that the mining industry has gotten in the last little while. And it's really great, as you said, for us to have the opportunity to change the narrative and to be part of the solution and to be an attractive place for the next generation of great scientists and engineers and community developers to want to be part of solving the big problems of the day. So we really appreciate your comments, and we wish you the best of luck as you battle out with the Minister of Finance to get the envelope you're looking for in the budget. So we're cheering you on. Let's just put it that way. So
All right. Thank you
thanks
very much.
again.